This message comes from ADP. Whether it's a last-minute policy change or adding a new company holiday, anything can change the world of work. From HR to payroll, ADP helps businesses take on the next anything. ADP, always designing for people.
Would you time travel to another time or place if you could? And if so, when and where?
To be honest, I'm not sure I would be hot on time travel, although I have just watched all 3 Back to the Future movies with my kids. Actually, I think maybe the 80s would be fun, with the perms.
Yeah, just to get into the swag.
Get into the swag.
Get into the clothes. I don't think I would go backward, I think, to stay for a long time. One thing I would do, I would go back for maybe the 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. hour to specifically go to Studio 54. That I would do.
That is a good idea.
But then I want to be dropped off and picked up directly outside the club.
In a DeLorean.
Exactly. The DeLorean needs to get me for outside the club. I'm a Black woman. I'm not going to the past and staying. And you know what else, too? I feel like there's a lot to be grateful for these days. People don't smoke indoors. We've got antibiotics. And it's less common to be casually exposed to lead all the time. You probably have heard that even though we have all of these advancements, there's an idea floating around that Americans are more unhealthy now than they were in the 50s or 60s.
When I was a kid, we had the healthiest kids in the world in our country. We spent during my uncle's administration, when I was a 10-year-old boy living in this town, we spent 0 on chronic disease.
That's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and he's been saying this kind of thing for a while. Of course, that claim he's making about spending 0 on chronic disease in the 60s, that's false. But this narrative about America's worsening health, it really begs the question, what does healthy really mean? And even if in some ways we are healthier now, why might some people feel differently? To get into it, I am here with NPR health policy correspondent Selena Simmons-Duffin, who wrote a piece on this last year. Selena, welcome to It's Been a Minute.
Hi, Brittany. Thank you for having me.
Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. In what ways is it true that Americans used to be healthier?
Oh, there's definitely some truth to this idea. I mean, there was definitely less chronic disease than there is now, less obesity, less diabetes. There was a lot less ultra-processed foods because that had been barely invented yet. People were just coming up with the idea of processing food in this way.
Dang, no Doritos.
No. Americans were also less sedentary, partly because of what jobs were available in the economy at the time. And there was no HIV. So there are definitely some good things about America back then.
I think that there are other dimensions to Americans becoming less healthy that aren't being discussed here either, like the fact that depression rates are historically high. Now, I don't think we can compare exactly that to the 1960s because depression as a diagnosis was reserved for severe cases back then. But even in the past 10 years, the depression rate has shot up a lot.
Okay, yeah, I think what you're really talking about and what you're pointing to here is that health and society changes in really complicated ways, right? When we're talking about the health of people in the 50s and 60s, the whole context of health was different. The whole, environment which might bring to rise depression, the way it's diagnosed, the way it's treated, the way it's understood, all of those things are different. So it's really hard to compare the health of back then to the health of today because of all of those contextual differences.
So I wonder, in what ways then has our health improved?
So many ways. So many ways. Modern medicine has just evolved in absolutely astounding ways. And one way that you can see that medicine is better is that we live a lot longer now, 10 years longer than we did in the 50s and 60s.
That is a huge difference.
It's a really big difference. And some of the reasons for that is that there are fewer traffic fatalities. We have airbags and seatbelts, and that really helps, right?
Yeah.
There are fewer smoking deaths, although smoking is still the leading preventable cause of death in the country. When you get diagnosed with cancer or a heart condition, there is way more that medicine can do for you. And so what that means is if I get diagnosed with one of these serious conditions, whereas 50 years ago, that might have been a death sentence.
Yeah.
Now I live longer with a chronic condition that I'm treated for, right? So when we talk about the rise of chronic conditions, part of that is that things that might have killed you faster don't anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Infant mortality has also gone way down. And I also want to point out that the health and life expectancy of Black Americans has improved dramatically since the civil rights movement. There's still a gap, but that improvement in that group has really improved Americans' overall life expectancy.
Wow. Sorry, that last statistic is blowing me. Okay, so to kind of like get a little deeper into this fact check on RFK Jr., I mean, RFK Jr.'s argument says that there was basically no chronic disease back in the 1960s when he was a kid. That's not true, right?
No. That was not true at all. So 1963, as an example, just because, I looked at the data for that year, 2 out of every 3 deaths were caused by heart disease, cancer, and stroke. Those are chronic diseases.
Yeah.
I mean, America was spending plenty of money treating these conditions that very much existed and very much killed people back then. One thing I wanted to point out, too, is the trend of chronic diseases increasing, right? He talks a lot about how it was lower then, it's higher now, and that is true. But the trend began before the 1960s and continued after the 1960s. And when you're talking about the 1960s and chronic diseases, you're just pulling like one column of that trend line. And that has to do with infectious diseases.
Oh.
And how they became less of a threat thanks to antibiotics and vaccines.
Right.
Right? Like when you look at the charts of what is killing people, infectious diseases have gone down. So it's really misleading to talk about America's declining health as if it's just a story about chronic diseases increasing, without acknowledging the gains that have been made in the 20th century related to infectious diseases, which is not something that Kennedy talks a lot about.
Gosh. Okay. So, regardless of the nuances we've just discussed here, like, how does this narrative serve RFK Jr.'s aims? Like, how does this serve his goals?
Well, I think it's worth pointing out that when he brings up this era, he's reminding everyone that he's part of this American royal family, essentially. His father, his uncle were very popular, handsome, powerful. And instead of saying in the 60s, he says, when my uncle was president. So I think in that way, this narrative serves him personally. And I also think he's using his power as secretary to kind of scale back in terms of the Department of Health and Human Services that he oversees. He has cut the staff at HHS by 20,000 workers.
Wow.
There have been cuts to the funding going out from NIH to researchers all over the country. Whole centers at the CDC have been essentially shut down. And so I also think that the narrative that HHS grew too much, that we're trying to do too much, and that we need to go scale back to basics also kind of serves that idea that we need to turn back the clock. And that fits with his approach on these other fronts in terms of how he's running HHS.
Okay, so my question is like, if he thinks that we are less healthy now, why would he get rid of so many people from the Department of Health and Human Services?
I think the answer to that is that he doesn't believe that the federal health workers who were employed before he came into the job can be trusted with the problems that he sees with America's health.
But has he rehired people that he thinks?
There has been some rehiring, but you're right. There is a big disconnect between him saying that we have this really big problem and we need to fix it, and how he's actually administering this enormous department. When I say HHS, people don't always know that that is the umbrella organization for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention,
Right.
the National Institutes of Health, Food and Drug Administration, all and more, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, right? Like,
there's a lot going on in that department, a lot going on.
there's a lot going on. And I think one thing that's really frustrating from the HHS staffers that I've spoken to is, for example, there's a chronic disease prevention center at CDC that Kennedy has tried to shut down. And that seems really counterintuitive given what he says he thinks the problems are. It's a big center, too.
Yeah.
It's been cut by a third. In his budget request, he was trying to get rid of it. There's a lot of disconnect between what he sees as the problems and how he's administering this actual organization he's actually in charge of.
We're going to take a quick break. But first, if any of you are finding It's Been a Minute for the first time, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the show and that you come back every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning for brand new episodes. Tomorrow, I've got a brand new video episode about why our films and TV shows have been filled with pathetic men. And if you're looking for more on our government's health narratives, I got you. Look out for our episode on health trackers right here next Monday. Coming up after the break,
Other countries have implemented things like universal health care and gun control and robust social safety nets. And America has never had those things. And so nostalgia kind of keeps the universe of what's possible limited to what has been done here.
stick around.
This message comes from Factor. Pro athletes eat smart, train hard, and recover fast. Factor makes it easy with dietitian-designed, chef-prepared meals built to fuel your performance. Choose from high-protein, calorie-smart, GLP-1 support, and vegetarian options designed by nutrition experts to support strength and recovery. Train like a pro, eat like a pro. Right now, go to factormeals.com/healthy50off and use code healthy50off for 50% off and free breakfast for a year. This message comes from Grainger. Grainger knows that as an HVAC technician, you and your digital multimeter are in high demand. So when a noisy office HVAC turns out to be a failing blower motor, you don't break a sweat. With Grainger's easy-to-use website and product information, you can select the product you need to keep everything humming right along. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
This message comes from MIDI Health. CEO Joanna Strober shares why they started a virtual care platform for women in perimenopause and menopause.
Our goal at MIDI is to make sure that all women have access to really expert care, starting around 35 and 40, making sure that they get access to all the things that can help them thrive as they're growing older.
MIDI Health, committed to helping women in midlife with perimenopause and menopause care, accessible via telehealth visits at joinmidi.com.
So much of what's informing, like, how he feels about how healthy Americans are now or were back then is, like, nostalgia. Like, make America great again and make America healthy again, you know, have three of the same words, you know? And there's a kind of desire to return to this, like, imagined, better past. And I get how that works for MAGA, right? The story that's being told in the broader Make America Great Again project. But, like, why does that work for MAHA? Like, when we're talking about, like, all of the gains of modern medical research and modern medicine, nostalgia, it just doesn't seem like that makes sense. So why does that work for MAHA in this case?
You're right. I think that it is kind of a weird fit to want to turn back the clock, especially when you're thinking about medicine and health and things like seatbelts and airbags. Like, we want to keep those things. I think one thing that's really interesting is that even when we talk about how there were ways in which Americans were healthier back then, there are many ways in which people in other countries are healthier than Americans today. he sometimes mentions the global context of now, usually to say that our peer countries live longer than we do, which is accurate. But he's not then pointing at the policies they're implementing to get there because they wouldn't fit well with his policy priorities. Like other countries have implemented things like universal health care and gun control and robust social safety nets. And America has never had those things. And so nostalgia kind of keeps the universe of what's possible limited to what has been done here.
Wow, that's deep. That's deep. That's deep. It's so interesting, too, because like the idea that we have something to learn from other regions of the world where people are living longer, healthier, and sometimes happier lives. Like that's an idea that I have noticed can be embraced by people from a variety of backgrounds in America. Like I think about the blue zone regions.
Oh, yeah.
So blue zones, there's this researcher who claimed that there's 5 places in the world that have a lot of people living past 100. Okinawa, Japan was one of them. Loma Linda, California was another. And there was this whole Netflix series about it where they were like traveling around the world and trying to figure out like, are people drinking tea? Are they going to church? Are they talking to their neighbors? Like, what are they doing to live so long? And there have been questions about the scientific validity of so-called blue zones because of allegedly poor data. So I'm not saying necessarily that these findings were true, but this was a kind of popular idea. So I think Americans are interested actually in the idea of learning from other cultures how we could potentially live longer, higher quality, and better lives. And there are policies in other countries that support these things that America, as far as I can see, has not applied.
I mean, I think about it all the time, and sometimes it's frustrating when you're doing health policy and you're just talking about what could pass on the Hill or, some of these ideas in some ways are so basic, but they seem politically impossible. So it's hard to even have that conversation about what would that do for American health if everybody was insured? What would that do for American health if it was just easier and cheaper to get fresh fruits and vegetables in more parts of the country? You know what I mean? In some ways, some of these things, we can make the Netflix show and travel all over the world and find out what special kind of tea you're supposed to drink or whatever. But it's all basic and we all know it, right? The job of the policymakers is to make it happen for more people.
To that point, what would really move the needle on improving holistic health or life expectancy for Americans? And how does that square with this administration's actions?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about kind of a dorky, wonky document.
I'm welcoming it. Let's go.
Okay. So when I was working on a story about American life expectancy a couple of years ago, I found this report that came out in 2013. It's called Shorter Lives, Poorer Health, and it was put together by the National Academies of Medicine. And it was this ultra-expert panel, and they came together, and they worked for years, and they were really trying to figure out, why is there a gap between how Americans are doing and how the rest of these other countries are doing? And, they talked also about health access, health insurance, but they point out that that is only a small part of health. What really conditions American health is outside of the doctor's office. But President Trump and Secretary Kennedy, like all of the administrations before them, are not really following this advice. We're not looking at making really big policy changes or using this as a blueprint or even calling a new panel together to make a new report. That's over 10 years ago. So maybe there's something new that we could learn. That kind of thing is something that Kennedy could do and could yield some really positive results that I think would really be in line with the MAHA movement, with all of these ideas. There's definitely room for improvement. There's definitely policy levers that could be used. And I'm not seeing a lot of movement along those lines.
One of the things that is really chilling to me when I think about this entire thing is that we have, like you said, there's all these resources. There are all of these public health tools that the Department of Health and Human Services has at their disposal. I don't know, one of the things I've been thinking about is recently the FDA said that they wouldn't even look at a recent vaccine application from Moderna.
Yes.
Moderna had sent this application. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars to put together a trial for an mRNA flu vaccine. And the FDA said, we're not even going to look at that. It wasn't like they responded saying they rejected it. It was like, we're sending a letter saying that we didn't even read this because it was so outside of what we would even consider. And so as a result, Moderna said it's going to scale down its investments in vaccine trials in the United States. Because at the end of the day, I mean, regardless of how I or anybody else feels about it, they are a business. The FDA eventually reversed course. But if I'm running a pharmaceutical company, right, this is a really hostile environment. But like, we know that vaccines are safe and effective. This has been proven time and time again. And I love personally to not get the flu, but I don't know. We're potentially being exposed to all kinds of infectious diseases, possibly for years to come, because our government is sowing distrust in vaccines. I don't know, having this sort of authority to be able to improve so many people's lives and kind of choosing to do something like this, it's really mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that particular situation, to your point, kind of points to this larger issue, which is that the way that HHS has been operating the last year really changes the ground rules in terms of how research is done, how investments are made, and not just in terms of biomedical companies that are making business decisions, but also in terms of like the federal government itself that does a lot of really basic bench science research that ultimately becomes these tools that can really help a lot of people. And when it comes to vaccines, should not be a surprise in the context of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. being health secretary, because he came in as an anti-vaccine activist. And we're seeing him use the tools that he has, the power that he has in this role, at least when it comes to vaccine policy. And you know, the childhood vaccine schedule has been changed. Recommendations for COVID vaccines has been changed. And I think that we can only expect more changes like this. There's no question that the environment for breakthroughs, for cures is different now. And I was really struck because I covered the State of the Union speech that Trump gave, that science and medicine and breakthroughs was not mentioned.
Yeah.
One of my sources pointed out that is really the bread and butter of the State of the Union speech. Like, you always have a section where you talk about, like, the breakthroughs and the cures. President Trump did not mention science, breakthroughs, medicine, research in his speech. And I think that's really striking. I think that silence really says a lot.
Even though, as we discussed, there's a lot of nuance to this, I think there are still a lot of people for whom, like, this idea that we are unhealthier or, you know, and that something has to change, that idea resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah.
I also have noticed a trend in culture that people are becoming more health conscious in general. We've been talking about that on the show. Like, what connection do you see there? Why do you think that is?
Well, I feel like every generation has a version of this. Like, you know, I grew up going to a homeopath with my parents in the 80s, or
okay.
You know, they were doing an Atkins or some other diet. I think social media has probably played a role in amplifying that, but I think that sense of like trying to get health on track and trying to be holistic, like there's always been that. Because I'm a policy reporter, I think it's worth trying to tease out the role of government, the role that the government has to play in this space, and the role of culture in healthy habits. Because there are ways you can use regulation to make healthier foods easier and more affordable. We've talked about some of that. Invest public funds in facilities that make it appealing to go exercise or walk on sidewalks instead of driving your car. But personally, for me, when politicians give me advice about what to eat or how to exercise, I don't always love that. There are ways to encourage people to eat healthy and exercise. I would just say that maybe politicians are not the best messengers for that.
Ooh. Who are the kinds of people that you think would be the best messengers for that?
I feel like those things, like personally, what I'm cooking, how often I'm going to the gym, I'm picking those things up from my friends. This is a culturally transmitted habit-forming kind of thing. Like, I literally, my friend will cook something for her kids, and I'll be like, that looks good. I'm going to try that.
That's very real.
When I started at the science desk, everybody at the science desk got up at the lunch break to go exercise. And I was like,
Huh.
I mean, that's a workplace culture thing that's kind of infectious. I'm not saying that, like, you can, like, snap your fingers and say, American culture, now we're all into exercise. There's a really complicated interplay in terms of individual decision-making, policy-making, and this kind of in-between space where we're picking things up from each other. That's culture, right?
Yeah.
That's something different than stroke of the pen dietary guidelines or bootstrapping, like, take things into my own hands. Like, there's something in between there. There can be more of a conversation about how to create social networks and culture in which we support each other in getting to healthier places.
Selena, I really enjoyed this conversation. I've learned so much. You got to come back.
Yeah, I definitely want to come back. This is really, really fun.
That was Selena Simmons-Duffin, NPR health policy correspondent. You can find her work at npr.org. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Liam McBain.
This episode was edited by
Nina Patak.
Our supervising producer is
Barton Girdwood.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
This message comes from Takeoff by IXL, the K-5 core math curriculum that continuously differentiates learning. Everything teachers need to personalize instruction is on Takeoff's digital platform. Learn more at takeoffbyixl.com.
This message comes from Jerry. Many people are overpaying on car insurance. Why? Switching providers can be a pain. Jerry helps make the process painless. Jerry is the only app that compares rates from over 50 insurers in minutes and helps you switch fast with no spam calls or hidden fees. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Before you renew your car insurance policy, download the Jerry app or head to jerry.ai/NPR.
This message comes from Takeoff by IXL, the K-5 core math curriculum that continuously differentiates learning. Everything teachers need to personalize instruction is on Takeoff's digital platform. Learn more at takeoffbyixl.com.